Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube. But the URL is really crazy, so just go to YouTube and search for Virtual Memories Show. You can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSPod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Okay, just held a meeting of my Board of Trustees and then read a 230-page piece of legislation looking for minute changes from the previous version, because Congress is about to vote on this thing tomorrow or Wednesday, and I need to make sure my guys in my day job aren't getting hurt by it. Tomorrow, I will be out the door at 5 a.m. to get a train down to Washington for an all-day meeting about pharmaceutical supply chain security, because I lead a life of adventure. But for now, we get this little island of sanity in my life, and I hope yours, a brand new Virtual Memories Show. And my guest this week is the underground comics legend Joyce Farmer. Joyce and I recorded during my L.A. trip last month, Sunday morning at her home in Laguna. It was a suggestion from Karen Green, the curator of Columbia University's comics collection, who I recorded a show with earlier this year. Joyce is amazing. I'd heard her name before. I knew a little bit about her work, but I did my homework going into this one, and between that and the conversation we had, I was floored. Joyce went from being a housewife to making groundbreaking comics in the underground era in the early 70s, and she was tackling comics on abortion pre-Roe versus Wade. She has traveled around the world. She's been a classics scholar. She came back to comics after nearly 20 years away to make this absolutely heartbreaking memoir about the death of her dad and her stepmom. That book is called Special Exits. It came out in 2010 from Fantagraphics, and it's just a fantastic and harrowing book. And Joyce, well, you'll get the idea, I hope, based on this conversation, that Joyce is a really important figure in comics and counterculture. Also, as far as I know, she is the only guest of this podcast who has ever employed bounty hunters, because she ran a bail bonds business for years. But it's funnier just leading with the bounty hunter stuff. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you anything else about her because it really comes out in the course of our conversation. Here's Joyce's bio from the back of Special Exits. Joyce Farmer, born in 1938 in Los Angeles, is a pioneering underground comics cartoonist. She and Lynn Shevely wrote and drew a controversial feminist humor starting in 1972, publishing the titles Pandora's Box, Abortion Eve, and Tits and Clits Comics. Farmer has also been published in women's comics, Mama Dramas, Itchy Planet, Energy Comics, 00, and the notorious women's sex comic Wet Satin. Her work has been exhibited internationally, including Austria and Italy. Her most recent work is Special Exits. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Joyce Farmer.
I was told by a very fine cartoonist once that cartoonists, of course he was loyal to his craft, cartoonists are special because they can deal in both visual and text and put it together and also be funny. And he says this is a very hard thing to do. And people who do it naturally have difficulty because lots of the world can't even comprehend.
I had a girlfriend who couldn't read comics. And in fact, when I was recording with Howard Chaykin yesterday, he mentioned his wife has the same thing. She can't meld picture and text together. She doesn't, and he said, it's just like watching a movie with subtitles. Eventually you get accustomed and you're not reading, you're absorbing the words and you can get it. And she's like, yep, nope, not interested. I can't figure it out. And so, yeah.
A lot of people consider themselves too intellectual to do it. And or maybe it's my own version of this, but are you recording already?
We are. I thought we would
It's okay.
actually start with what you were just saying previously. So about the, what we were talking about, the definition
comics.
of a cartoonist. Yeah.
Well, my cousin is a physicist. She's an astrophysicist, tenured professor at UCI. Mm-hmm. And she knew that I had published a book, and she knew that it had been reviewed in New York Times and a lot of other places. And she didn't read it until she ran into it at Barnes & Noble on the rack. And so I guess she bought it, and she browsed through it and said, interesting, and that was the end of that. Now, this is my first cousin.
Yeah.
And I've been following her career since she was 18 years old.
Mm-hmm. I have a first cousin whom I've never met, who lives 20 miles away from me, which is also kind of weird and disturbing, but that says more about my family than it does about, cartooning and astrophysics. But yeah, there are still aspects of comics that are weird. Well, if you don't have them as a background, I guess, as a language.
I've been reading comics. I have a picture of my dad and I reading the Sunday comics when I was about 18 months old, sitting at a card table. It's a very sweet picture. Yeah. It's not in focus particularly, but you can see what it is. But this particular cousin she admits to having, I don't know if she's been diagnosed Asperger's, I would say severe Asperger's, in that she's very high functioning, but it's all intellectual, and that's the end of that. And if you don't fit into her world, you just don't matter.
I think there are aspects of I can't talk to more than one person at a time.
Thank you.
If I hear a baseball game, I can only visualize like right angles of fields. I can't visually imagine somebody like in the shaded areas of a ballpark. It's little things like that I realize I probably have some.
I think everybody, they say there's a spectrum, and everybody's on the spectrum somewhere.
And I figure I'm functioning well enough, right?
Yeah, exactly.
At least everybody hasn't figured out that I'm
if you can get on a plane from New Jersey, you're functioning pretty well there. So.
It was that, getting in a car and driving up to Ventura yesterday, directly off of the plane. So, it was a long day.
That's only 3 hours.
Well, it was like Zeno's paradox. Like the closer I got to Ventura, the longer the app told me it was going to take to get there, because it just stretches on as the day went, which is why I got here nice and early today. But starting with 18 months old, tell me about your history with comics and how you started out in it and what you were reading as a kid.
Well, I always liked comics. Mm-hmm. And I think this was because my dad liked comics. Obviously, he kind of led me into it. Although you wouldn't know, he was not associated with anything. He just liked to read the daily comics in the paper. And then later in life, he would have me explain New Yorker cartoons to him, because he was such a Los Angeles boy that he didn't get the New York aspect of certain things, but he always read the New Yorker. So as to my comics, I just always loved them. I can't remember not loving them. When I was in grammar school, I tried to draw a comic strip, but then it got to be an awful lot of work when 2 or 3 friends wanted your story and you had to redraw it each time. And then I wanted money and nobody wanted to pay me anything. So that was the end of that. But I actually fell in love with Mad magazines when I was about 14 and collected them. On my own, I threw them away when I was about 20. More history?
Were there artists within Mad? Were there particular artists who you...
Oh, Jack Davis.
Yeah.
Didn't know his name back then. But
that's what I wonder about with you guys, like when you started to differentiate among different artists and figure out who you loved.
Yeah, Jack Davis was the reason I got it. Also Sergio later on. I don't know when Sergio started working for them, but I don't think it was the real early issues. Mm-hmm. Sergio told me one time that he went to work for Mad Magazine because they'd let him do cartoons where he didn't have to put in any text, because he was so unsure of his English that Have you ever interviewed?
No, I believe I've met him once last year, and
Yeah.
I would even now. I believe
interview
that's the
him
case.
as soon as you can.
I would love to. Yeah, he would be.
He's in Ojai. Anyway, I don't remember where I was, but
just that.
so that's how Sergio got a job. But anyway, in 1972, Lynn Chevley approached me. Lynn Chevley was a bookstore owner here in town. She approached me about drawing her ideas for a feminist version of Zaps. And I didn't even know what she was talking about. So she loaned me a bunch of underground comics, and I thought they were stupendously good.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe my eyes.
And this would have been the Zap crowd, like Crumb and S. Clay
Well,
Wilson.
that came later, but this was just my introduction to the comics, and I was just blown over. And this was a turning point in my life. I realized that my life did not have to be run along ordinary lines. Mm-hmm. There were people out there, and I could find them, and I could make connections and do things, and I could, to some degree, draw. I learned to draw better as time went on with the comics, but the first comics were pretty poorly drawn, poorly written, poorly drawn, great ideas. Yeah. So,
but you were young.
Yeah.
Did you study drawing at all? Or
I went art? 1 year to the Art Center. It's now called the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, but it was in Los Angeles, and it was very rigorous. And I was 18 years old, and I was not failing, but I couldn't handle it, and emotionally, and I dropped out for a semester, and then I just never went back. Mm-hmm.
Do you regret that? Do you regret that?
Yeah. Yes and no, because Art Center School, its emphasis was on making money with whatever you did. It was not an fine arts school, and it didn't pretend to be. And my grandparents had been financing my education at 18, so they insisted that if I wanted to be an artist, that I be able to earn my living at it. And so Art Center had this very rigorous program, and you pretty much had to draw the way they wanted you to draw, or they would punish you for it. You had to get with the program, and you had to do these slick things. And I, even at 18, didn't want to quite follow everybody else's pattern. Mm-hmm. So I think that was one of the reasons I didn't do extremely well in the school. Plus, I was very immature. So I dropped out, married one of the other students. He graduated after we worked very hard and had a baby, et cetera, and several years of really hard work. He graduated. The idea was to put me through school, and by then that subject never came up. So, everything was on the shelf. I was a housewife for years and years, and then I moved back to Laguna, started at least understanding that there was an art community here and that it could be fun, and started making some interesting friends, and moved back to Laguna in 1965, or moved to Laguna from Arizona. And in 1972, meeting Lynn, and from then on, just in my life, it turned for the better. It was really interesting because I had been living this very ordinary life, knowing that people like Tom Lear and is it Anna Russell? I don't remember, but various people were out there being really wild. I didn't have a TV, but somebody gave me a Tom Lear album, yeah, and I adored it. And then I just started meeting more and more people who were that kind of people, and this town was full of it back then, and it was easy. So in order to earn a living, I worked my way through college. I worked in an insurance office and later doing bail bonds, working my way through college. But after college, I was kind of looking for something to do, and this person wanted me to draw her ideas. And like many beginning artists, you don't realize that you end up doing 90% of the work because ideas are cheap. Yeah. You get a million ideas, but you don't only draw a few of them because it's just so much work. You have to really sit at a drawing board and just get it.
Making a comic isn't just graphically rendering a script.
Some people do it that way, and I don't really like it because and some people don't even, I guess most people pencil first, but some people pencil and then ink as they go. And I think that that's a very difficult way to do things because ideas can change. You may decide you want to really redo, and it's so much work. When I did special exits, I had 2 editors, one for the text and one for the drawings, because I didn't want to make any serious mistakes as I was going along. And about halfway, I had the book entirely drawn in pencil, and somebody said, my friend in Athens actually said, "You've got to do perspective. It's not in perspective." And I said, "Well, who cares?" And he said, "The book is based on a solid reality, so you need the solid perspective. Just do it." And he was right. And
how much redrawing did that involve?
Not too much, because most of it's talking heads and
Sure.
other things, so you can fudge it. So there's only, maybe 100 places. Not bad.
I know, like Chester Brown, who we'd mentioned before we started recording, I think it's just 1 panel per page. He'll just cut and paste them all in, so it's not
Oh, does he?
Yeah, so it's not all drawn. All the panels aren't drawn onto a single page, so at least there's some flexibility there.
I don't have that.
Yeah, it might be something you work on in your, in your new mature
I'm learning
phase
to
of the work.
do watercolor, and it's coming very, very well. And so if I ever do a book, it's got to be in color because nobody does very few people do black and white anymore. And besides that, it's interesting to learn a new skill. So, but I had my editor, my text editor, at one point, I had the book entirely drawn, and she said, "Well, you need to put this panel here, and you need to make that more emphasized, and you need to move all these things around." And I said, "Look, can't be done.
Yeah.
I can't redraw that much." And so this was something she had never edited a comic form before, a graphic form before. So we didn't lose the friendship over it, but
you had to learn that there were limitations to
what
could be done.
Yeah.
So tell me more, though, about when you first started out with the underground work in the 70s with Lynn. How did that progress? How did you change in the process of, finding yourself as a cartoonist?
Well, it made me brave. I saw the work of Crum and Wilson and these other people in San Francisco. The women's comics came out at just the same time the Tits and Clits did. So
that was the anthology. You and Lynn.
Yeah, and we didn't know them at all. So we didn't know they existed. So Lynn and I were really just looking at the comics of others and not having any contact with San Francisco people. So for 3 months or so, we drew the first Tits and Clits, and I was learning and relearning how to put ink on paper and doing it well enough for an amateur. And there was a convention in April of 73, first underground convention, and we were invited to it. And we published the book. We got the book completely drawn and inked. And we didn't know whether we should publish it ourselves or take it to a publisher, so we found somebody to talk to who said, "I'll pay you $1,000. This was for the 32-page book that we'd worked 3 months on, $1,000. And we looked at each other and we thought, the book costs 6 cents a book to print. We're going to print 20,000 copies. And if we sold all 20,000 copies at 50 cents, which is what it was then, that would be $10,000. And even if we had to sell it at a big discount, because you have to do that to distributors, it's still about $4,000, which is 4 times as much as $1,000. So let's publish it ourselves."
Nice.
And each step made us stronger. And we got advice, we got nice, honest advice from people whose it might not have been their best interest to give us this advice. Back then, a lot of people figured that whatever you told females, they couldn't carry it out.
Yeah,
they didn't have the knowledge.
They're not going to follow through.
They're not
going to.
Yeah, it's a big risk. Yeah. But Lynn and I both happened to have an extra $600 of our savings, and we found that's what it cost to print the thing. So printing 20,000 copies she had the names of distributors, so it got distributed, it got sold, we reprinted, and we're well on our way to selling the second bunch of 20,000 when people started getting arrested for doing pornography in the underground comics. And then we almost got arrested ourselves. The booksellers, Lynn sold her bookstore. The people who bought it were arrested for selling our comics and a bunch of other underground comics. The police were so badly informed that they thought they were going to be arresting Lynn. And the district attorney who was behind it all wanted to make she'd made a case of, I think it was Deep Throat. Anyway, something before the Supreme Court, and she wanted to kind of repeat the action. She was here from Orange County. And she thought that if she got the publisher, then you could got the bookseller, then you get the publisher, and then you get the artist. And isn't it clever that they're all three in one town, in one county, under her jurisdiction? Mm-hmm. So it was a very scary time, and we didn't get arrested because the ACLU stepped in, and you probably know all of this because you've
I've done some research, but our audience might not.
Right, okay. Yeah. So the ACLU stepped in and took the part of the bookseller because we were not at issue because we had not been arrested. But we had been advised to get rid of every one of our books, so we had a very big adventure doing that, hiring a truck when neither of us knew how to drive, which I refused to drive, and Lynn drove it anyway, even though she realized that as she was renting the truck that her license was expired.
Yeah, but at least she had a license. So
yeah, she had a license. I'm not sure she had a license to drive a big truck, but there we are. It wasn't that big. It was a giant pickup or giant van. Anyway, we got rid of 40,000 comics in a day or two. Very nice friends stored them for us. We kept track of everything. We had to get rid of, the ACLU told us to get rid of all evidence of any activity in comics. Mm-hmm. Bookkeeping, everything, money, everything. Just get rid of it. So we did that. And a year later, it all came around. But by then, after a fear of being arrested for pornography, when at the time we were doing it, we did not consider it pornography, it was a sobering experience. And I never really drew the same again because my brain and my fingers would not go into that danger zone of getting arrested. I couldn't afford it. I owned a house, and I had a child, and I had a job that required a state license from the bail bond license from California. And if I were to get convicted, I would have the license taken away, couldn't afford the house. The child might have to be taken by his father. It just was more than I wanted to even think about. It was, I didn't want to explode my life that much. But we still had ideas, and in 1976, well, we produced another Tits and Clits under the name Pandora's Box because we realized that we couldn't get reviews with Tits and Clits. So Pandora's Box didn't sell well because anybody with 50 cents who would buy Tits and Clits in an instant wasn't so enthused about something that only said Pandora's Box. Same content, but never mind.
It's branding,
Yeah. Then we did a book on abortion because both of us had been volunteering at the free clinic teaching birth control, and then we realized there's no point in teaching birth control if we can't also talk about abortion. And this was 1973 and 2 when the issue was being decided by the Supreme Court. And in January of 73, just as we were finishing our book on abortion, and that book was describing the mental condition and the types of people, typical types of people who needed or wanted abortions, and their mental thinking, or their thinking, I should say, redundant there, and that physically what the process was. Because we had been counselors, we went to hospitals and watched this happening and could describe it very well, of the woman on the table and the doctor and how the whole thing proceeded. And so we were sharing that information. We actually, again, like Tits and Clits, we didn't realize how radical we were.
Yeah, it's funny because it sounds like you're just, well, this makes a really good idea for a project, not realizing it's the most controversial thing in the world in America.
Exactly. And apparently, I'm going to set it. The fault is Mad Magazine and Tom Lehrer. Sorry, without those guys, well, and a few other cartoons. I'm sure Mort Saul and a bunch of others fit in there somewhere. But the point is that the 60s was a time of explosive interaction and learning of what was considered then radical ideas, which I only considered, well, that's sensible. I'm coming from an atheist family. They never said they were atheist, but I'm coming from a family
didn't have a presence of church or religion,
that never ever went to church. My mother, as she was dying, kind of took on Christian Science, but it was never encouraged for me. And I toyed with it. I tried with my first husband. I became converted, and it never took, because once you're raised from infancy with no church or no religion, it's very hard to seriously adopt one, especially if you're from a scientific family. And I'm not sure where I was going with this, but the point was that I had a relatively free female mind to go where it wanted to go. I even think that the death of my mother when I was 11 freed my thinking up sufficiently, because I didn't have anybody sitting on my shoulders. Mm-hmm. My dad he never mentioned that he didn't, about anything about censorship, but the point was that when I was 13, he left coming of age in Samoa around for me to find, which I devoured. And later on, I was reading From Here to Eternity, and I felt that I had to hide it. And I read other books like that at the age of 14 and 15. I read Boccaccio's Decameron at 15 and horrified my Catholic friend who wanted to read it. But the point was that we had no censorship in the house, so I could read these things. I do remember dropping The Coming of Age of Samoa in the bathtub as I was reading it, taking a bath. And
never found out work.
And having it get wet and not ever being able to unwrinkle it, and hoping my dad didn't notice. And bless him, he never said a thing.
So, you were born, 38 or so?
I was born in the very tail end of 38.
Okay, so this would have been going into the 50s and 60s, really.
Yeah.
Actually, what did your mother die of?
She had diphtheria when she was 4 years old, and it ravages your organs and continues to ravage them. So she should never have had me. And I was 11 when she died.
Yeah, and her mid-30s or so.
She was 37.
Yeah. I remember it came up in the book. I couldn't recall the cause. So,
right.
But again, that whole process, which I know was terrible, but at the same time, you just felt it left you open to...
I didn't know it at the time, because kids just deal with the reality that's in front of them. But I remember the day that she died, I went back into the house. I figured it out because my dad came home in a taxi, which is undone in our junky neighborhood of South Los Angeles. Anyway, I knew immediately what had happened, and he told me Mother had died. And I went in the house, went to her key ring, took her keys off the key ring and put them on my own key ring. And that was the end of that. And nobody ever said I shouldn't. And I became somewhat of a grown-up from that time on. I didn't have anybody telling me what I had to do, so I had to be mindful of what I did, because I had to survive. I had to look before I crossed the street, and instead of somebody telling me to look, that sort of thing. So and my father and my father's family, I think, just always had this idea of raising children lightly. They didn't hover, and they didn't tell you what to do as long as you were doing all right. Yeah.
And you seem to, mom at an early age, but still,
well, I looked around when I was growing up. All my friends had mothers that they just hated. And I didn't have a mother. And then I realized, well, that maybe that's not the very worst thing in the world. Mm-hmm. So Not that I grew to love my mother later on, but at the time, when you're a teenager, you didn't want the annoyance of a mother, and I didn't have that, so
Yeah.
a little freedom.
Now, let me ask about Lynn's impetus to come to you for the cartooning. Did she? You mentioned wanting to have a women's version of the Undergrounds.
She wanted that. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there a sense? Did she have a sense of as good as the Underground guys are, there's heavy misogyny going on, and we need to have our voice heard?
Yeah, we can cut off penises.
Yeah.
And fling them across the yard arm the way Wilson was doing with women's parts. We started the book with that idea, and we couldn't write the stories. We wanted to be violent, mean, and swear a lot, and we could swear a lot, but we couldn't be violent and mean. And we just ended up saying, hey, there's this story, there's that story, what about that? Yeah, that would really gross them out. Let's do that. It's got menstrual blood in it. Let's sling some of that.
Again, crossing over with S. Clay Wilson. But go on.
Yeah. Well, Wilson later became a friend. And,
sure.
And Crumb I only met Crumb once, but I've met Wilson any number of times, enough to run around with him a bit. And so it was
Was there that sense, though, that there needed to be a corrective?
Sure. Yeah. Why not? Well, we had the sense. I think that perhaps other people were shocked that we did it, but I think that they didn't disagree with our plan to do it, and a plan to be as we just couldn't be. What would you call it?
Misandrous.
Must be misandrous, right? Well, that's
that's crossing Latin.
That's
and Greek,
a great name. Yeah. No, it's not.
No. They're
both
Greek too.
Both Greek, but it's a great name for a character in a book, isn't it?
Miss Andrew. Yeah. Which I'm sure somebody has trolled the internet with before. But yeah, feel free to steal. That's
yes.
But over time, again, you were able to produce that sort of work, but also essentially be friends with the male underground cartoonists.
We loved them.
Yeah,
we loved them, and because the women's collective in San Francisco was in some sort of partial war.
Yeah, did you feel more tension with the other women than you
no,
did with
the other women really welcomed us into the group. The men welcomed. They all wondered who these women from Southern California were that were getting ideas like they were getting. Yeah. And we explained that we got our idea, we got the impetus from them, but our ideas were our own anger and frustration from being housewives for so many years. Lynn was, I think, 38 when we started, and I was about 31. So we were not 20-year-olds with immature anger. We had actually experienced. We had seen some world. I had actually gone around the world in 1967. So, on a ship.
I was going to ask, flying or...
No, I didn't walk. No, on a ship. I got a scholarship on a world campus afloat. And that was, they call travel is broadening. It sure was. You learned a lot about how the world runs when you see on the street how people live. And in India and China and all these places, Japan, everywhere.
What was your favorite place during that tour?
Well, Greece, because I had always liked Greek mythology, and I went there. When I went there, it was just something magical for me. I just fit right in. I just loved it. Mm-hmm. Wanted to go back. Had to wait 12 years before I went back, and so now I go back every year because one of these years I won't be able to, so I go now, and I keep going, and it's hard on the people I live with. It's a bit hard on my husband, but he became to understand my need to do this, and so he's a very nice guy. Hell of a nice guy.
Yeah, he seemed pretty good. I met him on the way out when we were coming through.
Yeah, so. Everybody likes Palma. He's easy to get along with and very sweet. I don't think he has any enemies whatsoever, unlike me.
I hope to come out on your good side by the end of this, but
never
we'll
mind.
Find out.
Even if you don't, it'll be interesting. That's the point.
What took you away from comics ultimately?
Oh, well,
which I know is about a 10-year stretch.
There was a stretch, and it was my business. In 1984, I went back to doing bail bonds because I could earn enough on a weekend to support myself. I had very few needs. So I could earn enough on the weekend to support myself all week. And all week I could do cartooning. And I did that for a while. And then I lost that job and I started my own agency. And that took up so much time. I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never having a predictable amount of time for myself. Couldn't afford to hire anybody. And then my parents were getting ill, and I was finally able to hire somebody in the bail bond business so I could travel up to Los Angeles and shop for my parents and see that they get to the doctor once in a while. And it was about 10 years of complete hell of dealing with that. I also started planning to build this house because I had the ability to do that finally. And my time was just taken up with a million other interests and things to do. I was learning Greek, and I was starting to travel to Greece and being able to do some of the things I could afford to do that I could never afford before. And then after my parents died in 1994, I kept thinking about all the funny things that happened when they were alive, and of all the situations
Not
that
funny,
happened
but just the story, is it?
Well, my dad had a really good sense of humor, and he took care of my Alzheimer's stepmother for years. And frankly, I don't think I could have done that. He was really good, and I was helping him help her, and that therefore it helped both of them. But it just took up everything. And I kept remembering the stories, and I thought, well, I can draw out a few of these stories and maybe sell them. They're worthwhile stories. They've got a moral. They're interesting, And pretty soon I started writing down the stories, and there were 100 of them. And then I realized, well, that's a book. Spiegelman had just done Mouse, and there was no reason I couldn't do a graphic novel. Well, it's not a novel since it's a memoir, but that started me working on that, but it took 13 years. I wanted to do it right. I was invading my parents' privacy, even though they were dead. I was excavating their privacy. I had no right to put them on paper like I was doing. So, since I decided that I was an atheist, they were dead. They were not going to come back and do terrible things to me. Yeah. And they never have. Not in my dreams, not anywhere.
Looking around the room.
Yeah. And I think that I wanted to do the book really well because I had to honor them. I couldn't dishonor them because I was already invading their privacy. Mm-hmm. So I changed their names, but I tried to do the book as well as I possibly could, and that just took a long time.
Can you talk about that choice to fictionalize the names?
Oh, it's easy.
Why you chose to do that?
My stepmother, my dad didn't really have friends, but my stepmother had friends, and I had relatives. I have a son and daughter-in-law and a couple of granddaughters, and all the feedback I got from my son and family was that they didn't like what I was doing particularly. They didn't like the idea of it. And I felt that it was valid to do, like with Tits and Clits. Yeah. I get an idea and I think about it quite a while and I say, well, this is valid to do. And I do it. And if I hadn't done it fairly well, it would never have been reviewed and picked up the way it was. So I feel okay about that. But I changed their names because there were people still living at that time who had known them well and that might object to...
Sure. Inclusion by proxy. Or,
right. Well, not even that. It was, they might object on their friend's behalf. This one scene where I show my stepmother nude and in her dementia, I had a lot of trouble justifying that. And I finally decided to do it because it, in truth, was completely charming. Yeah. Hate to say it. Yeah. I got caught up in thinking that it was a terrific story, and it actually was exemplifying what the entire book was about. And so I worked very hard to put humor in that book, and not everybody sees the humor, but the book is a compilation of generally 2-page stories that are all hooked together casually, trying to make it look like a plot. But my editor said, "Where's the plot?" And I said, "Well, the plot is 2 old people dying."
Yeah.
That's the plot.
It's episodic, but it's all leading to key points.
Not being involved in the English language and the college education of being taught English, I don't even know the terms, and I still don't know them. But to me, it was a valid book that was coherent, and I felt that my dad was teaching me how to approach death and how to do it with some dignity and lovingly with his wife and etc. And I started realizing that this needed to be shared. Roz Chast is a really good cartoonist. Her sense of humor, now you're from New Jersey, her sense of humor by all Western standards is, may I quote, I didn't invent this term, it's New Yorkie.
Yeah, it's neurotic Jew, Northeastern.
Yeah.
As a Jew from the Northeast, I can,
you can
out.
understand.
Yeah.
I wanted to present a different, well, I wrote my book before she wrote hers, but the point was I was going into the philosophical depth of it, and I was showing how my dad was preparing to die by getting his papers in order, by having me learn to do certain things, by arranging this and that, by all sorts of things.
Well, and even 2 unique experiences. They're universal experiences of people watching their parents die, but you had very different.
Each is unique. Yeah. Each is unique. Yeah, Roz's is totally different than mine. Roz's family, she lived about the same distance away as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it's about an hour plus to get to New York.
But her parents, I think, went into a home, whereas my dad was very insistent that he not do that. My dad had bought the house in Los Angeles in 1941. The war, about a few weeks before the war started in December. And it was in South Los Angeles, and it was a good neighborhood it was a working class, decent neighborhood when he settled there. And by God, he wasn't going to move or by whatever, because he didn't ever say by God. So he wanted to finish out his life in that house. And I didn't blame him. And I thought, well, that makes sense. But the favor he did me was that when he knew he was dying, and he had weighed almost 400 pounds. So this is something I don't put in the book, but he was extremely fat. And how he got to 82 is beyond me. I always expected him to have a heart attack or something.
Good genes.
But no. Yeah.
Decent genes, but yeah.
He ate cheese every day of his life. He thought a snack was a 4-ounce gob of cheese. And thinks that I consider myself skinny compared to what my family was like. And so when he finally realized he was going to die from lung cancer and how he felt, he just basically didn't want to deal with the annoyance of having them give him chemotherapy or anything else that he wanted. He just wanted to die. He knew it was his time. He just wanted to do it. And this allowed me, by his refusing treatment, it allowed me to drop my life here in Laguna and go to Los Angeles and live with him and help him
in those final weeks.
Finish it. Yeah, however he wanted to do it. And fortunately, my husband and I had friends who were out of a job who were lovely people, and they came and helped me and stayed. They stayed 6 nights, and I stayed 6 nights. And then each of us got a 24-hour day off, and different days, of course. And it worked out very well, and I could not have done it without them. I don't think I could have done it. I would have had to hire somebody. And they were hired. I mean, we paid them.
Yeah, you convey that in the book.
But they earned a lot more than we paid them, as far as I'm concerned. They just did a marvelous, kind and loving, and just very sweet.
Now, what was the length of time from when they died to when you started working on the book? Stories?
Well, they died in spring of 94, and I started actually working on the book in summer of 97, writing down the stories that wouldn't leave my mind. I figured if the stories have not left my mind by 3 years later, they're valid stories, and I should at least make a note of them. And almost all of them were put in the book. And And the cat we adopted the cat, but about 3 years, and then it was 13 years in producing the book. And much of that was downtime because I would get depressed. And it's a very harsh subject, and it's hard to deal with. And so I just wouldn't work for a few months.
Was it difficult returning to cartooning? Had you been
No.
drawing in all the years
No,
in between?
I don't pick up a pen unless I've got something to say.
And did you find you had the muscle memory?
Piece of
Everything
cake.
was back?
Sure.
Interesting.
Sure.
Because I had wondered if there was a breaking in period, if you had a
No.
long multi-year
The only thing that happens is that you lose these tiny muscles up the right arm, because I could feel when I started drawing on a daily basis that I had this muscle in particular was sore every evening. Mm-hmm. But it got used to it, and now it's still there. I was looking the other day. There's all these strange little things that I have here that so it's like I still draw. It's like riding a bicycle once you learn.
Yeah, that's what I'd wondered, if you had to get back in practice or not. So,
not for me. Good. Not for me. Other people, I've heard that they have problems.
And it might be different types of technique, et cetera.
Yeah,
so one of the other questions formally about the book, you do everything in a 2x4 grid of panels. Mm-hmm. 2 columns, 4 rows of panels.
Not quite everything, but basically that's true.
The few get broken up, but you always stay within the 4-tier
in that pattern.
thing. What was the motivation for doing that, or was it just a?
I have a very good motivation. In fact, several of them. One of my motivations was that I did not want it to look like a DC comic book, mm-hmm. which has got all these splash panels
and
this,
giant panels to show off.
And the other thing was that I wanted to make it easy to read, because as soon as you have to start putting little arrows telling you where to go next, you've lost the reader because it's a distraction. So I wanted this to just go smoothly, one da 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 da, to have people fall into the book and not even realizing they were still reading whatever they were doing. There's a great deal to be said for a boring background to interesting things that are happening, because then you aren't distracting in other directions.
Mm-hmm. So the idea, well, the story itself was, we'll say, prosaic, because you're not telling the story in ways that are flying off in terms of
right
interiority.
Yeah.
You're really relating.
But it's an interesting story, and it deserved to be.
Like the storytelling mode serves the story itself.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sorry, my descriptions here are failing me, but that's exactly what I'm saying. The storytelling mode the storytelling mode did not have all this wild action, and so I didn't want the reader to be distracted with showboating, the new word.
Yeah. You look at doing another book. This was 2010 that it came out from Fantagraphics.
This was 2010, and I basically said a big sigh of relief, and I hope I never deal with this again. Of course, there was almost the Eisner, and there was a bunch of
recognition.
And I'm still in contact with dozens of people that I've made friends with or gotten to know, and they write back and forth, and this takes up way too much time. But I like doing it because I feel like I'm moving the intellectual part of the comic kingdom forward. There's too much comic work being done that is basically barren, empty. And
in what respect?
Well, 20-year-olds doing their life stories type thing.
Thank you. I've ranted about that numerous times on the show. So yeah, I get
they've got nothing to say yet. I don't care if they've got a drug addiction. That's peanuts, and they don't have enough of a life yet to really talk about. So I've been trying to encourage people who are working, for instance, with comics and medicine, which can get very deep into the psychological aspects. And there's medical personnel. Their artistic talents are sometimes lacking, but their heart is doing very, very well. They're right in there doing nice things. And so I'm encouraging what I consider the intellectual side of comics, because a comic is as capable of being as nuanced as a novel, only many people don't get that yet. And I just want to push it. I want people to honor it, because I think it deserves the highest honors. It's a really interesting field.
besides the great praise that you got from Crumb about special exits, were there other cartoonists who you didn't know who have approached you based on this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about them without, insulting anyone?
And we'll get back to the question that you asked, which I haven't answered yet. But just for instance, Paul Karasik, who has a cartoon in the New Yorker here and there, and I don't actually know what he does. It turns out he grew up around where my cousin lived in Maryland for much of his life. He's a generation younger. He's done. He and his sister.
I think Paul teaches, but he's always so well dressed that I assume he's too well dressed to be in comics.
Well, he's a cartoonist for sure. Yeah. He and his sister did this book on his autistic brother, on their autistic brother, and who was seriously autistic. And it's a long story, but anyway, Karasik and. I'm not coming up with other names just off the top of my head, but there are lots of them. I'm
friends
in
that you
contact
made
with a lot of people.
in cartooning. Since,
in cartooning circles, people who teach. It's the people that I'm gathering into my circle are more the intellectual edge of it. So a lot of times what they do is they've started out with the intellectual idea and then gone into cartooning instead of the other way around. The 13-year-old girls all seem to want to be cartoonists these days, and some of them may be eventually. So, okay, as to what's next, at first I just didn't think about it, and now I'm starting to think about it. Margaret Atwood has just had Handmaid's Tale come out, and I was reading a review the other day, and she was describing how she collected material for Handmaid's Tale, and it's exactly what I am doing to collect material for whatever I'm doing. She would read the paper every day and go clippity-clip and take out things that would be interesting.
Right.
So I'm showing here Iran authorities to exercising women. Stop, don't move. Okay, what right do they have to tell the female population of Iran to not exercise to, what is it, Zumba music or something? Yeah, Zumba music. I don't know how sexual Zumba music is, but
it's control.
It's control over the women, and I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it, and I'm not going to do anything in Iran for sure, but there's a lot of control here. There's a lot of husbands telling wives what they can and can't do. Women get killed over whether they buy ballet shoes with a little pink bow on them, and their husband thinks they're doing that so that they get a lover. This kind of thing is serious, and people have got to stop and get a grip. And I'm just reading all these articles. I don't know where I'm going. I have a very big interest in not overpopulating the planet, because I don't care how many scientists, I'm going to be kind, scientists, dreamers are out there saying, well, we'll have a colony on Mars. Pardon me, you're not going to have a colony on Mars without gobs of money to support it. And even then, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, I just saw a headline yesterday. I didn't read the article on how that Tesla guy, Elon Musk, thinks he'll get people to Mars for less than the cost of attending college, which I think you can, given the cost for attending college, given that that's going through the roof faster and faster, it might be that that's getting high, not the cost of Mars is getting cheap.
Tell me this, will anybody who is hungry be able to go on Mars? No. They're going. We are not solving the problems we have. We have too many people, and Planned Parenthood has a slogan, a motto, make every child wanted. And I think that's a beautiful idea. If every child were wanted, they would be better cared for, and we wouldn't have a devastating overpopulation, such as what is happening in Philippines right now, and many other places. So, and when you have the population under it's some sort of rational level, then you can also deal with climate change. But if we keep populating, we cannot control the climate change. It's going to get out of control. The political situations in these different countries are going to be at each other's throats, and pretty soon it's going to be boom, and we're all going to suffer terribly, if not die. And so I want to do a book approaching these problems, but I haven't got a clear idea yet. So I'm gathering all this material, and I'm going to take it to Greece with me this year and sequester myself in this village that I go to, put a sign on the door saying, "Not today," and and go swimming once a day, and then get to work. I'm really looking forward to it, and I can't do it here.
Yeah, what first drew you to Greece? Oh, you mentioned your interest in Greek mythology.
Oh, when I was a kid, I loved my
Bullfinch and the whole.
If you're raised in a household without religion,
you still want something that's
the stories.
Yeah,
I love
that's what
stories.
I mean. You still want something that's
it might
that's
be
bigger
considered
than the world.
mythology, and there might be gods involved, but these are not believable gods because they're not that God that all the Baptists and Catholics go to, and Jews, if I may say. It's everybody.
A big,
Muslims,
big guy in the sky.
Yeah, the guy in the sky kind of idea, which clearly never appealed to anybody in my family. So the Greek mythology and the great stories, and then when I went there, and I'm walking on the land that this mythology is from. There's the village of Thebes, what we call Thebes in English, and I go right through it, and I go right through Argolis and
that's
Pylos,
something that's perennially missing for Americans, that we just don't get. And the further west you go, the less history there is, because we annihilated the native population and all that. But
there's all of that.
But when you get to Europe, I'm sure Asia, it's even more pronounced. But
in Europe, at least for me, in Greece, every place I walk is filled with history, and I feel a connection that I can't. It's a connection that I understand that people have with mother love, which never occurred to me when I was a mother. So I was just so panicked. I didn't pay any attention to whether I loved or not. But this is it
was just to make sure she doesn't die, sort of thing.
Okay, well, and to love them, you cuddle them, you play with them, you do all these things. But my God, it's taking all my time, and I want to read Leonorus or something. I don't know. So. Motherhood was very difficult for me, and if I'd had 2 children, I think I wouldn't have survived it.
Yeah.
So that's another very deep feeling. But anyway, I like to go to Greece, and the people in Greece who live there now, the citizens of Greece now, well, aside from horrible politics, and they have a spirit, and their spirit is fed by going back thousands of years and knowing who they are. Even every little villager knows who he is. Mm-hmm. She and he. They all know who they are, and they all have an aura to them that makes them have heft and intelligence. Even if they have no education, they have a pride and a being. Not all of them. I mean, everybody's.
Yeah, you get good and bad people. But,
We have. But. It makes me, and the Greek women, no matter how put upon they are by the laws, the rules, the men, the husbands, the things that happen, no matter how put upon, they sort of wink and go around it. And it's just quietly done. Everybody does it. And God, do I love them for that.
You take any lessons from that when you come back to Laguna? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Do you keep up with cartooning at all today?
No.
Okay.
Not really. I've gotten well enough known that people come to me and I sort of float through whatever they are offering me, but I'm not going out searching for it. Every once in a while, like yesterday, my friend sent me all these they're from the 70s, 60s even, these books, like the old classic comics. It's a version of that. So I'm reading that. It's kind of fun. I'm reading Pogo because I never read Pogo a long time ago, and
I just never got into Walt Kelly. For some reason, I just don't dig it.
Well, I might not, but he's such a classic that you ought to know him.
Yeah.
It's like you should know these various people. But no, I don't keep up. The women's group in San Francisco is, I'm in touch sometimes with certain ones, and I have my own life here. If I were to keep in touch really in touch with all the people I should keep in touch with, I would have no life other than keeping in touch. And I can't do that. I read a lot. I need lots of downtime. I need to be alone a lot. Mm-hmm. So I arranged for it. And fortunately, when I married my husband in 1991, neither of us care particularly to be joined at the hip. And so we have our individual lives, and then we get together and we do together things. But we don't feel any compelling interest that we have to do what everybody else does and make it look like an ordinary marriage.
Does he read comics? Does he read your
No,
stuff?
He's never read my book.
Yeah.
He doesn't read comics particularly. He might get interested in this Sherlock Holmes illustrated story over here.
Not quite
but
comics.
He reads a lot of, this is his reading pile. He reads a lot of French. And he was married to a French woman for 23 years, so he speaks the language quite well. And
That's no reason to learn the language. I'm just kidding. Go on.
Well, she never quite learned English. No, I shouldn't say that. She understands a great deal of English, but she still has such a strong accent. I sometimes have trouble understanding her, but she knows this. We're quite good friends. We're all, her husband and Palma and I are all good friends. But no, he's not interested. He's never, I don't know if he finds them intimidating because he knows that I'm somebody in comics, or whether it's just a disinterest. I really don't know.
Do you wish you had continued cartooning in those intervening years?
Yeah, I wish I had, but on the other hand,
You still
got
wouldn't have had
this
the time.
big experience that Dad handed me that book.
Yeah.
Handed it to me. All I had to do was write it down.
You're about the age that your parents, well, your father and stepmother were when they died. A little bit
yet.
younger?
Not
I know.
yet.
But you're almost at that age.
I am 78, yeah.
Yeah. And they were 82 and 80.
He was 82 and 86.
Do you think about that?
Yeah.
Not that I want to ask you if you're thinking about death, but your book is all about your parents dying, and
yeah. No, I'm trying to be wise about it. I'm trying to get that's why I'm doing the archives downstairs. I've organized comic books. I've had friends. There's a couple of guys that are there's a National Cartoonist Society, extremely small, here in Orange County, and we are not overly mindful of the rules because there's only 2 of us. But there's about 10 people that come to the meeting once a month. And 2 of the guys are English teachers, but they're very, very hooked on underground comics. And so they have come here and will be coming here in the next few weeks to help me finish the organizing of my
cataloging everything.
Well, I already cataloged it, but it's a payoff for them because they're seeing work that they never even knew existed. Yeah. And it's a payoff for me because some fool is finally putting them in bags and boards and I don't have to do it. So it's working out very nicely. And the next thing I have to archive, I have 2 universities who want my archives and I haven't decided where they go. And there might be even more people who want, but they haven't approached me. So I want to archive and organize my paperwork, which is, I always called it old stuff, old correspondence, old letters, but it's now called archives. And I'm trying to get that coherent so that I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's not a matter of doing it before I die. It's a matter of getting it out of my hair.
Did you ever imagine being a person whose archives were going to be requested by a university?
What a surprise.
Because people always tell me I need to keep like high-res versions of these because someday these episodes will be your archive. I'm like, yeah, but really. You
don't know, and you don't. What I've found is that a friend of mine said, well, Joyce, you've already broken ground several times. You've done a woman's comic, an underground comic about sex. And then you did Abortion Eve. And then you did Special Exits. And all 3 of these are groundbreaking things. Well, I find that I'm not interested in doing something if it isn't groundbreaking. What's the point? Somebody else has already done it. So then when the attention starts coming, what's happening is that the Tits and Clits are beloved of women's studies, and the Abortion Eve is beloved of women's studies and medical students, and the Special Exits is beloved of everybody, mainly medical students and women's studies. Well, not so much women's studies, but medical students.
Yeah,
let's
the graphic
say that.
medicine,
the graphic medicine thing, So it's nice to have crossover. It's nice to be known. But no, when Special Exits came out, I was on my way with a friend. Actually, it happens that it brings back friends from the past. Somebody I hadn't seen in 28 years. Beloved friend from college.
But I heard you on NPR, and
well, she heard. I had been trying to contact her, and anyway, I finally found her. She came to visit me at just the moment that Special Exit was published, and I had an interview in Santa Monica that I had to get to from here. So I said, "Come with me." Mm-hmm. So that day, I also learned that the book had been reviewed in the New York Times Review of Books. And I'm going, wait a minute.
This is bigger than I thought.
Santa Monica interview with Dangerous Minds, which I'd never heard of before, but everybody says, that's big. and then, who can say? So it just started snowballing from there, and it's calmed down, but for a while there, it was just one thing after another, and it was very adventurous, and I loved it. Mm-hmm. I like to say yes to interviews because they teach me where things are going, and I like to get my ideas out there a bit more. So if anybody listens to this, it's really neat.
No, it's just going to be you and me, but I'm just kidding. There'll be some people.
Oh, that's all right. It's all right. I don't know where your interviews go.
Oh,
actually.
It's the internet. I'll send you a link when the episode goes up, but
right.
You'll see.
But the internet is several billion people by now, right?
That's the thing. And if I can just get a little percentage of them, I'm all set. But it's up on iTunes. You'll find. I'll show you how to get it. But, did you imagine that you were going to do your first long form book in your 60s? Was that when you were starting this whole thing, did it really occur to you that, holy crap, I'm taking on a 200-page project?
It did.
Yeah.
And I also know I draw slow, I think slow, I read slow. But I did a nice book. Even I think it's nice. So I'm happy with it.
I think it's an amazing project.
I would not have let it out of my hands until I was satisfied that it would not have embarrassed my parents to all hell and gone, except for a few scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, we know which ones they are. But
right.
Still,
So,
Joyce, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memories Show.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And that was Joyce Farmer. She is, as I mentioned, a legend. I'm really hoping that someone brings out a collection of her underground work soon. It was great just spending time with her and also seeing the absolutely amazing place where she lives in Laguna and just seeing all of Laguna going up the cliffs and everything in that early Sunday morning. It was one of those experiences that makes me very happy that I do this show because it's things that I would never get to do otherwise. And I want to thank Karen Green again for connecting us. Now, you should go pick up Special Exits, Joyce's book, which is published by Fantagraphics in 2010. Joyce doesn't have a website, which is for the best, but she does have an amazing collection of comic art, and she showed me a whole bunch of stuff, including some great sketchbooks that Sergio Aragones and other people have drawn in over the years. We did all that stuff after we wrapped up, and that's part of the great experience I got to have. Now, once we wrapped up the main session, I did ask Joyce, so, who you reading? If you want to hear her answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can do that at patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for supporters of the show, including that bonus podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, series of ebooks, and more. Well, someday I'll get the series of ebooks going. Once that massive piece of legislation I was referring to at the beginning of this episode finally clears up, I should have a little time to breathe. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, this episode, as mentioned, was part of my L.A. trip prior to a San Diego trade show, just like the last few episodes with Graham Chaffee and Howard Chaykin. That side trip turned out to be pretty expensive between the rental car, hotel, and parking. Food and coffee were pretty negligible, but still, it adds up. So, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like travel, web hosting, equipment, etc., then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. Make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to Kevin Katila, John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David's got a reunion project going with his great 80s band David and David, and you can find out more and support that at facebook.com/DavidandDavidMusic. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with the last conversation from my LA trip. That'll be with comedy writer and scholar Ben Schwartz. Until next time, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store or at soundcloud.com/VMSpod. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can follow the Virtual Memories show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and at YouTube by searching for Virtual Memories. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories show, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Till next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.